Within the last, call it 2.5, 3 years, I've lost 6 people that I've served with due to suicide. This PTSD thing is a real issue, and it doesn't just surface right away. It typically comes out down the road. It was really difficult for me to get the phone call to hear that he took his life. Unfortunately, it was him that was the catalyst, him that was the tipping point that pushed me to get this nonprofit started. If you don't resolve that trauma, you can look forward and you can live your life, but that trauma is always going to be. But at the end, she says to me, you have the same level of PTSD as most soldiers that deploy. None of this stuff is normal. None of this trauma is normal. None of the things that we had to do, the decisions that we had to make, the stressors and all those things, that's not normal. I had a business to go back to, and I was like very motivated to get that thing back up and running, because when I left and what I left behind was not a good situation. That trauma doesn't go away, right? It's just buried. It's just compartmentalized. And the other aspect of it too was I was broken physically. Back, shoulders, knees, ankles. It took me a year to recover. You know, my journey as an entrepreneur, that started for me when I moved from Chicago back in right around 2000. I'm going to get out. I don't want to do this anymore. I've got a business to grow. I can't stay in and knowing that I'm not giving 100%. 45 days later, I get a phone call that says, hey, this is Colonel so-and-so. You're deploying to Afghanistan in 60 days. And I'm like, how the heck am I going to leave for, 16 to 18 months? I'm going to just dump all these houses on my employees? I'm like, there's no way. And I can tell you that the anger and the mindset I had at that point before I deployed was 100% victim. When you look at, is the hero the guy on the ground holding the weapon? There's heroes back, the families, the wives, the spouses, whatever, that are heroes as well for holding the fort down while we're overseas. Sometimes just talking to my wife at night or whatever, because that would be morning for her. And all of a sudden we'd be getting shot at. And I'd be like, I gotta go. And she's like, what's going on? I'm like, bye. Knowing what I've known after a couple deployments, that doesn't happen overnight. There's a lot of processing that we have to go through when we come back.
From humble beginnings to heroic service, today's guest will take us on a journey to success and fulfillment with a few unforeseen stops in places like Afghanistan. Mike Christensen is a 20-year veteran, a successful entrepreneur, and now a man on a mission to help military veterans successfully heal from the wounds of war and make strides in building the life they deserve, regardless of where they might be at on their journey. Mike, welcome to the Plain Success Podcast.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on now. And this is great. I love doing these, and appreciate you giving me some opportunity to kind of talk about what I have going on, and just greatly appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, let's just dive in right there. You, within the last year, have started a nonprofit that is, I know, close to your heart, Freedom for Heroes. Can you tell me what Freedom for Heroes is, what the inspiration was, and I've got a lot of questions on Freedom for Heroes. So let's start right there.
Sure. Yeah. So I originally, joined the military. Really, to be honest with you, was for the free college. I had gone to college already and did a career that didn't work out for me, and my parents had paid for that. So I didn't want to kind of go back to the well again and ask them for money to go back to college. So I literally was driving in my car one day and looked off to the side in some strip mall, and it said free college. And literally did a U-turn, went right back in there and met the recruiter and was like, where do I sign? So that's kind of how I joined the military originally. Had no idea that it was going to, grow and develop me as a leader, and I would enjoy it so much. And so I had done, basically done my 20 years in the military, done a couple deployments. And after my second deployment in Afghanistan, I had come back, and within the last, call it 2.5, 3 years, I've lost 6 people that I've served with due to suicide. And, prior to that, I had been thinking about starting this nonprofit, and to give you a little more context, like I retired from the military in 2013. I had come back from my last deployment in 2008. So we're talking 15 years, and the fact that six of these people took their lives in the last 2.5 to 3 years is just, proof that this PTSD thing is a real issue, and it doesn't just surface right away. It typically comes out down the road. And so it was, unfortunately, a friend of mine, the last friend of mine that took his life was the tipping point for me, to just, get off my butt and make this thing come to fruition. And so it's been a little bit of a journey. I own a small construction company that I started over 20 years ago, and I kind of forgot what it was like to start up a new business, a new entity, all over again. Even though it's a nonprofit, you still have all the same components basically that a business does. So I kind of forgot a little bit about what that journey was like. But we've navigated through that. We got an attorney involved and helped us with the IRS and all those pieces like that. But and so that's kind of I guess the grassroots of how this thing came to fruition. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. In fact, I read recently that oftentimes our purpose comes from our pain, or our passion comes from our pain. And I've had the experience of losing loved ones, but I haven't had the experience of losing someone to suicide. And I was scanning your social media feed for Freedom for Heroes, and something jumped out to me that isn't top of my mind, but it sounds like it's really been top of your mind in the last few years. And what was on there that says, we recover loudly and share with others. When we recover loudly and share with others, we keep others from dying quietly. And so I just would love to ask, with those six friends, did you have any idea before finding out that they'd taken their life that they were struggling, or did that just come as a complete surprise? And given that shock or surprise, if it was, how strongly has that influenced how you're structuring Freedom for Heroes and the work that you want to do?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, the only one that I had knowledge of him struggling, he had, before he took his life, he had called me up, and he lives, 10, 15 minutes from where I live. And he was like, hey, let's go have breakfast or whatever. And my wife and I will meet you. We're thinking about building a house too. And we just, it's been a while, let's catch up. And so we ended up meeting up for breakfast, and it kind of started coming about the struggle that he was having. And, you know, looking back, of course, there were signs and there were signals that he was struggling worse than he led on to believe. And to listen to his story and the struggles that he had dealing with, mostly with the VA, I would say that's probably the biggest challenge he had, was trying to navigate through the VA in terms of getting actual help. I've got my own experiences with the VA, and I can tell you that it's not user friendly. It's very difficult. It's very challenging. I almost want to say it's guilty till proven innocent, in terms
Wow.
of anything related to VA claims. And there's probably, a little bit of a reason for that, because people are probably filing claims left and right that aren't legitimate. But those that have these deep-seated problems, like this PTSD problem that a lot of veterans face, he alluded to it a little bit, but it was more conversation about the challenges of the VA and things like that. And um, I it was really difficult for me to get the phone call to hear that he took his life. Like, and this was probably, it was last year, but from the time I met him till the time I got the phone call was only a couple months later.
Wow.
And I just, like, of course, the thoughts that start going through your head, like, why didn't I reach out again? Why didn't I text him? Why didn't I do this, that, and the other? And so that part is hard. To know that I couldn't have impacted him somehow to make him, like, think differently pivot on his own life. And, and so that part of it was really, really a really hard pill to swallow. Um, but all the other ones, I didn't know anything about it.
I can only imagine some of the thoughts that would have been going through your mind, and that have it doesn't stop, right? Just you don't find out the day something like that happens and then stop thinking about it. Um, do have you learned more about what he was struggling with after, and how has sounds like you had a good friendship with this guy. How has being more informed about what he was experiencing before taking his life informed some of the programs or procedures or opportunities that you've wrapped into Freedom for Heroes?
Yeah, so I definitely have learned a lot since the incident, and what's really the the bright spot in all of this, if you will, is that yes, unfortunately, it was him that was the catalyst, him that was the tipping point that pushed me to get this nonprofit started. But you know, I always try to find the silver lining, and that silver lining has been obviously the fact that we've gotten it going now, so that's a great thing. But his wife although she's not on the board, she's actively involved in all of the meetings. She's involved in things that we're doing, and she's you know, my wife and I and her have gone out. They've come to, you know, our Halloween party and stuff like that. So it's been really good in terms of connecting more with her, and it's really great for her on top of this because now this becomes a healing piece for her as well. And that alone, just to hear her, you know, it's not, you hear bits and pieces, you don't get it all at once, but I think eventually I'm hoping that she'll want to tell the story, you know, in full. And because I think for her own healing and also helping others down the road, that this is real. We can stop this. We can fix this. We can provide solutions. We, meaning me and all the other people out there that have nonprofits or the, you know, including the VA's involvement or whatever. But so I feel like that is a huge silver lining to all of this, is having her involved and having her be a part of her own healing by just telling her story.
You know, when I was reviewing the information on your website, one of the statements that I read talks about how healing is really a lifelong endeavor and it can't be done alone. But I hadn't connected the dot that, you know, I looked at what you were doing as directly a service to active duty or former military, you know, veterans. But I hadn't thought of, you know, really the healing is much broader than that, because even if somebody hasn't taken their life, even the experience of, you know, your experience of being deployed, I'm sure must have been incredibly difficult on your family. I don't know how long all of those deployments were, but even, you know, if it's a few weeks, it's stretching into a few months, there's trauma associated with just that separation. And I have to imagine the anxiety that your family is experiencing, knowing that you're in harm's way, not to mention what you experience and then bring home with you. And so now you're healing not just you, not just them, but now you're healing relationships that can be very complicated. So what are some of the activities? What are some of the counseling that you're providing? What's your approach to facilitating this lifelong healing with camaraderie and guidance and the other tools that you're employing?
Yeah, so you know the old, I'm sure you've heard the movie Band of Brothers, right? It's the group that you're with when you're deployed over there. It's a tribe, has a tribal effect, right? It's a community. You guys have each other's back. You know that the guy to your left and your right or behind you, whatever, has got your back. I mean, it's an experience that second to none, that, you know, if nobody ever gets to experience it, you can at least understand it through some movies, and that's Band of Brothers is a good one. So when you look at that tribal effect or that community effect, I feel like that's kind of the core of what I feel like the healing part of the foundation needs to be. So if we can get people to be a part of a tribe again and be a part of a small community. And I'm just trying to make my own little ripple. I'm not trying to solve all the problems. There's a lot of people out there that are doing what we're doing as well. And so I'm just trying to do my little piece of the pie to help out. And so basically, we kind of look at this as a two-pronged approach. We are going to have like a fun side of this. It can't be serious all the time, right? Like we've got to bring people in. So we're going to attract them a little bit with some things like some whether it's a overnight hiking, backpacking, a hunting trip, a fishing trip, those types of outdoor adventures I feel is very important, because I think you can get people together much easier, which allows for vulnerability and being able to tell their story. And so there's going to be that piece of it, which is the outdoor adventure side, which is going to be fun. And so trying to create that tribe where they're in an environment like that, where they're able to be vulnerable, where they're able to kind of put their guard down, which is one of the biggest challenges that veterans face. And then from there, try to grow that into, we want to do eventually probably 4 different retreat weekends throughout the year. And the idea was that we would take the same group of people and we would try to then get them into a retreat. And then we'll have, our therapists and psychologists that we're currently interviewing right now to try to figure out who's the best fit for that. But on those weekends, it'll be much more focused on mental health and the PTSD aspect of it. And there'll be some fun things too. We'll probably encompass some hiking and whatnot, because we're talking about doing that like up in the Sedona area. So it'll be a nice setting or whatever. But then to try to take that and do a couple other retreats where it's the same group of people, hopefully, that we can take through a full year of, mental health training, if you will. And I feel like if people are with the same group, you have a much, much greater success rate of trying to heal somebody. Because like you said, that trauma, if you don't resolve that trauma, you can look forward and you can live your life, but that trauma is always going to be there. It's going to come back up at some point. And even if you listen to what I said about I came back in 2008, people are taking their lives 15 years later. I mean, that's trauma that's coming back up again. It's just it's an interesting journey, and everybody's got a different journey, and everybody's seen different things, and everybody compartmentalizes things differently. And the part that a lot of times people don't understand is, like, you could have things from your childhood or your experiences through life that, although they're not traumatic in terms of war, there's things that could be triggered from your childhood or early adulthood or whatever it is, that once you're there in a combat zone and you're seeing things, it's a trigger. So it might not have to be so dramatic. Like, I've seen dead bodies and we've killed lots of people and things like that. Everybody deals with it differently, and that's the thing that's really important to remember.
Mike, how much of the way that you're approaching this has been crafted from your own experience and your own healing? I'm sure there's been trauma that you've had to heal from as well. What was like that like for you? And how have outdoor activities and maintaining a core group or a tribe been influential in your healing?
Yeah, so for me personally, being outside is a huge piece to my own life, my own personal sanity and healing. Not just from the results of me being deployed multiple times, but just for cutting loose and relaxing and things like that. Being out in nature has always been the one thing for me that's kind of helped me just let my mind go, and I get a lot of clarity of thought through being out in the backpacking out in the desert, or up in Sedona mountains, up in Flagstaff, or whatever that looks like, or just out fishing on a boat. Most of the time where your phone doesn't work, which is great because you got no choice but to listen to yourself and talk to yourself, which can be very healing, right? As long as you're not self-sabotaging yourself. But it's interesting. I again, like that 15-year time frame, going still involved in the VA system, they're trying to do better. They have done better, but it's, at the end of the day, it's government healthcare, if you will. They've gotten savvy, more tech savvy and things like that, but it's still a lot of the same mentality, the guilty till proven innocent. in terms of getting a claim filed, whether it's for, like I've got lower back problems, and that's a whole nother issue of me trying to get a claim approved and things like that. But what I learned, and I guess I can be vulnerable here for a second, because this is never, I don't even think my wife knows this, but I had gone, the VA primary care doctor that I go to all the time, just for normal blood work every year on an annual basis, says, "Oh, we're trying to get people to go back through therapy again, because there's, reoccurring things that are coming up. Would you be interested in going?" And I was like, "Okay, I'll go." And so I did this. It was, a Zoom call with somebody, and come to find out, she's like, "Oh, we rated you with PTSD back in like 2015." And I was like, "What?"
Wow.
I literally never even knew that, which there's multiple pieces to that. The fact that I was rated at that and I never even knew about it, and that's one whole piece. But then you take that fact that they had given me a VA rating for PTSD, and what's the follow on? Like, really, you just diagnose somebody with that, and then you're like, "All right, we'll see you next year on your annual blood test." Like, that's just one aspect of how the VA handles things, and it's just not the best way.
Mike, you said you had no idea, but were there periods of depression or anxiety or undue stress, or did you have recurring nightmares, or how did PTSD, did you ever have really any clue, or was this like, "Oh, I don't have that and I'm surprised you think I do"? Or tell me, let's go a little bit deeper there, because now I'm really interested.
Sure. Yeah. So that was like 2015, I guess, is when they made this diagnosis. I had gone. So let's go back a ways to like 2009 or 10, which would have been a year or two after I had come back, and that at that point they were like, everybody will go through some sort of therapy, coming out of Afghanistan. And my job was an infantry officer, so we were outside the wire every single day, facing, looking for the enemy and whatever we were doing, keeping hearts and minds and things like that. But that was just my particular role. Everybody did different things, and I'm not going to downplay one role or another, but I lost my train of thought.
Your PTSD, you're outside the
Oh,
wire.
yes. So when I had come back, I had seen this guy a couple times, and we just weren't connecting. It was just like he was listening to me, and we just weren't connecting on a level where I was recognizing that I may or may not have problems, or I may or may not have needed things to talk about. And so I had made a comment to my primary care doctor, and she was like, "Well, we'll switch you. We'll get you somebody else." So I was like, "All right, I'll try this again." So I went back, met with this very, very young person. I would say couldn't have been any more than a year or two out of college. And I go through the whole hour with her. And she's asking me all the normal questions, same stuff over and over that I've already heard, which can be a little bit annoying. But at the end, she says to me, "You have the same level of PTSD as most soldiers that deployed." And I kind of looked at her and I was like, "So is the way the VA and the government looks at PTSD, you're comparing me to another service member, not to a civilian? Because if you compare us to a civilian, none of this stuff is normal. None of this trauma is normal. None of the things that we had to do, the decisions that we had to make, the stressors and all those things, that's not normal." And that totally had turned me off. And I hadn't gone back until just recently, that the story that I told you about me, not too long ago, and the woman had told me, "Well, you were diagnosed back in 15 with PTSD," and I'm like, "Oh, great. What does that mean?" But to answer some of your questions too, as far as the different symptoms and things like that, like everybody definitely deals with things in a different way. When I came back, I had a business to go back to, and I was like very motivated to get that thing back up and running, because when I left and what I left behind was not a good situation. So I was fortunately for me, my mind was so geared towards getting that company back up and running again. So in one way that's good because it kind of kept my mind moving forward and forward thinking and things like that. But that trauma doesn't go away, right? It's just buried. It's just compartmentalized. And the other aspect of it too is I was broken physically, back, shoulders, knees, ankles. It took me a year to recover from just we would just be up in the mountains doing these dismounted patrols, and it's just all rock. And so your body's just constantly getting beat up, and, you're carrying, 300 rounds of ammo and body armor and a helmet. And it's just, it takes its toll on you. And anybody who says that it doesn't is telling you a lie, because it beats your body up. I don't care how young you are, it takes its toll. So I was kind of fighting multiple things, the physical side, but from the PTSD side, I was kind of like, oh, I had actually had the mentality that this was normal. Like the thinking, did I have dreams? Yeah, I had some dreams, but it pretty much went away really quick. Like the slamming door thing might have lasted 6 months. If I heard a slamming door, I would jump, the first couple months when you get back, your situational awareness, like when you're in a combat zone and you're driving down these dirt roads, you're constantly looking for wires coming out of the ground or freshly dug dirt from insurgents putting IEDs. And so your situational awareness is very, very, very high. And so when you come back to try to just let that go, it just takes time.
Yeah.
So.
Mike, I find it really interesting as you talk about the experiences that you had in the mountains in Afghanistan being a place that where maybe you picked up a lot of the trauma. It seems like now that's the place that you're going to drop it back off is your excursions into the mountains. I find it interesting that, what a full circle that is, where you're taking it what, was a painful experience physically, mentally, probably emotionally as well, but going back to the similar environment to be able to heal in all of those ways, to stay healthy, to clear your mind, probably for some emotional relief and healing as well. I just find that intriguing. And it's probably something that manifests itself in all of us. And although we've found it in different ways, I can really resonate. My trauma wasn't from combat deployments or participation in the military. Mine came from the losses of several family members in a very short amount of time, and focusing my mind on learning how to fly an airplane on aviation was something that really helped to provide relief. That wasn't the healing, but it did provide maybe enough of a distraction to allow me to begin the healing process. And you did have a busy life to come back to, or at least what was left of a busy life. Walk through, your life as an entrepreneur and that experience, and maybe the disaster that you anticipated as you were deployed, leaving behind what I think was probably just the beginnings of what looked like would be a really successful business, and you just had to leave it.
Yeah, that's an interesting story. But to circle back to what you said about the coming full circle with the outdoors piece and the hiking and backpacking, which I'm so passionate about now. I never correlated it like you just did. So I appreciate you bringing that to my attention. That's actually really powerful for me. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
But as far as, my journey as an entrepreneur, that started for me when I moved from Chicago back in right around 2000. And, being in the military, like I said, I was doing it for the free college. I wanted to serve. I was, patriotic to begin with, but I never thought I'd, serve past my 6 years. And next thing you know, I'm going the officer route, which takes a whole bunch of training and things like that. And it just started growing. And I just really, really loved it. It developed me as a person and as a leader. And, when I got deployed the first time and came back, I just kind of picked up where I left off. It wasn't that big of a deal. This was in 2002, 2003. And so that wasn't as big of a challenge. Now, fast forward to 2006, I had actually decided at that point, and I had over 10 years in the military at that time, which is, once you get kind of past that halfway point, you're going to go for the full 20. And I had developed my business and it was going extremely well that I actually went to, the next officer in charge above me. And I said, I'm going to get out. I don't want to do this anymore. I've got a business to grow. I can't stay in and knowing that I'm not giving 100%. And so the officer at the time says, hey, why don't you just take a year off, kind of see where your business goes. You've got over 10 years in, let's just circle back in a year. We'll see how that goes for you. And then if at that time you decide you want to get out. But in the meantime, we'll just put you, in a holding pattern, if you will. Inactive reserve is what they call it. And I was like, you know what? You're probably right. That's probably a really good, smart decision. Appreciate the suggestion. So that's what I did. I'm not kidding you. 45 days later, I get a phone call that says, hey, this is Colonel so-and-so. You're deploying to Afghanistan in 60 days. You need to report to the MOB station, blah, blah, blah. Here's the day and time. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. And so, here I am. And at the time I had like a half dozen multi-million-dollar custom homes under construction. And I got less than 2 months to like figure out how I'm going to, because it's just me at that point in my business. I was the guy, I was the one wearing multiple hats and trying to figure out how to scale. But at the same time, we were just building these beautiful, massive homes. But I was the guy. And I'm like, how the heck am I going to leave for, 16 to 18 months? I'm going to just dump all these houses on my employees. I'm like, there's no way. And so I literally tried to say, hey, look, like, I'm not trying to get out of this. I'm going to do my duty, but can you just put me on the next rotation? I can't go. Let me finish these houses. I've got contractual obligations. And they were like, sorry, you're going.
Wow.
And that's what ended up happening. And so I was gone all of '07, half of '08. And so for those of you who are entrepreneurs or lived through that time, that was a very, very difficult time. And the years ahead that as a result of that, recession that we went through. And I can tell you that the anger and the mindset I had at that point before I deployed was 100% victim. Like, I'm a victim. This is happening to me. This is not happening for me. This is horrible. I got to deal with these customers. I'm going to be, trying to run my business through emails overseas, just all the thoughts that went through my head. And I never once thought that maybe there's a blessing in disguise here. And so, I ended up deploying. I was gone for, I think, over 16 months. And when I left, the economy was just, it seemed like everybody was a builder or a realtor in the areas that I was developing in. And it was very affluent area. And there was a lot of wealth that was building these big homes. And so I literally, the whole time I'm gone, I had absolutely no idea what was going on with the economy. And
Wow.
I just like my last deployment, I'm like, all right, when I get back, I'm just going to jump right back into it. Oh man, was I sadly mistaken. I got back and I was like, what do you mean nobody's building houses anymore? I was so detached from where I was located up in the mountains in Afghanistan and just focused on my job there. I just really lost track of anything what was going on. So again, looking back now, or even, years after I returned from my deployment, it was a massive silver lining because, as a builder, when we buy dirt, we basically, if we own the dirt, we control the deal. That's kind of one of the sayings as a custom home builder. And so we would buy land and we would develop it for customers. Well, when things are going great and you're making a lot of money, you tend to buy more dirt. You also tend to buy other things that don't necessarily support, your business, but that being like a lot of people. Unfortunately, I didn't go down this path because I'm just not that way to begin with. But it's the big cars or the fancy cars, the big houses, the boats, the things like that. And fortunately for us, we never went down that path. My point is if I did not deploy, the chances of me buying more dirt to control deals down the road, there's a very good chance I would have been in the same bucket as a lot of those builders, and we would have been filing bankruptcy as well, because we would have been stuck with all this land that we're paying $200,000, $300,000 for a lot, and now all that stuff is worth 50, 60 grand. And what do you do? And so that's the whole blessing in disguise at the end of the day.
How long did it take you to come to that realization that that experience was a blessing? Because I don't imagine you went from an angry victim to, wow, I'm really grateful for that. That wasn't an overnight transition. And so was
No.
that after you got back? Did that take a few years afterwards?
I would say that was probably 4 or 5 years after the fact that it just finally dawned on me that that was a huge blessing, and I dodged a, no pun intended, I dodged a massive bullet there.
Wow.
So very, very thankful for that.
So we've left kind of a cliffhanger with those houses that were in active build as you left, and at the same time, 0708, it's very difficult to get a mortgage. A construction loan would have been, I mean, they just went away. So what
Yeah.
happened with those projects and how did those resolve themselves? How did you manage that from overseas? Did you have key employees in place?
Yeah, so that from a business perspective, there was a few nuggets in there. And to give a little more context, like the people that we were building homes for, they were getting their own construction loan. They were funding it essentially, and then they would pay us as the build progressed down the line. I wasn't a big speculative builder. I would do, one a year type of thing. But even if I had built one spec and that recession hit, I probably would have lost it all. So fortunately for me, most of what we were doing was for people. It was funded by them through their banks, and so those houses all ended up getting built out. And I had uh, two employees at the time and my wife that basically we just kind of sat down and we're like, look, this isn't going away. I'm leaving. You guys are going to get me through emails, and I'll get to call back once in a while. But this is not going to change. You guys have to gel together as a team. And my wife was kind of running point as far as damage control and keeping the customers happy, and just being a really good communicator. Um, and that's kind of how the houses ended up getting built. And even during that process, I'm in Afghanistan. I get a Red Cross message from about my wife, and I was like, "What the heck's going on?" And a little more context. My wife has a pacemaker. She's had a pacemaker since she was 8 years old. So I'm thinking something serious is going on with her heart. And so I ended up, I had a satellite phone over there, so I ended up calling her, finding out what was going on, and she couldn't handle the stress of running this business, and so that's a whole nother piece to all of this. When you look at, is the hero the guy on the ground holding the weapon? There's heroes back, the families, the wives, the spouses, whatever, that are heroes as well for holding the fort down while we're overseas. And I feel like half the time it was harder for her because she doesn't know what I'm doing over there. We get, there's these phones that through the military, they have lines that you can call back to a base in the United States, and then that base would connect you to whoever you wanted to call. They're called DSN lines. They're pretty good. And so I'd be on sometimes just talking to my wife at night or whatever, because that would be morning for her. And all of a sudden we'd be getting shot at. And I'd be like, I gotta go. And she's like, what's going on? I'm like, bye.
Wow.
And that happened a lot. So they're heroes as well. And that's something that can't be forgotten.
I can sense a lot of emotion behind you remembering that and saying it. A lot of marriages might not have survived that experience. I mean, let's face it, the experience of being deployed is stressful in a relationship. The experience of being an entrepreneur, married to an entrepreneur, can put a lot of stress on a relationship, as both of our wives could attest to.
Yeah.
But combining those two things, how did that strengthen your relationship with your wife? And what were some tools, some things that you learned from those difficult experiences that have helped both in your current business and to grow your relationship?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a lot of it is very deep diving conversations when you come back, and kind of like most service members or most veterans, like it's not something we want to just start openly talking about. So this happens over years. It doesn't come out overnight. I mean, there's still a lot of things that she doesn't know about, that we did over there in Afghanistan, and the, whether it was dangerous one day or not the next day, what that is like getting shot at, rocketed, mortared, all those things. And that's like I said, it's hard for them to not know what we're doing and have that fear inside themselves. And so a lot of it is coming back and just trying to slowly break those walls down within ourselves as a service member, as the veteran. Because a lot of it is, it can go south really fast if people don't handle it correctly, and then they treat their spouses, boyfriend, girlfriend, family members, whatever, in a negative way because of how they're handling their own PTSD of being back. So, there's, things like marriage retreat weekends that the military tried to put on. There obviously is therapy and counseling, things like that. But one of the things that, it just takes a while for you to open up and be vulnerable. And that's really when you open that door, all of a sudden things start to change, and people just naturally, most people want to help other people, and they want to be good listeners, and they want to just understand what you went through. So I feel like just having a great support network of family and friends and a spouse that understands, it was a career choice I made to be in the military. I didn't, she didn't, I mean, she married into that because I was already in the military, but, neither one of us, I never would have guessed by joining for free college, I ever would have found myself in a combat zone ever.
Yeah.
So,
as you talk about that, I shared with you that one of my daughters is engaged to be married, and her fiance is in the military, looking at a career in the military. And while his path, certainly, I don't think being deployed into a combat zone would come as a surprise to him at this point because of the path that he's following in the military. That's almost a given. But there are a lot of people that maybe are in your situation that were just looking for, maybe it was a sign-up bonus, or maybe it was free college, or maybe it was just to have an adventure, or maybe they just didn't think through the decision very much at all, and they find themselves in a similar situation. Now they're in the military, and they get that phone call saying, hey, you're going. What type of advice could you give to them, given your experience, that would help when they make that transition back into civilian life, or that would help to maintain that relationship? What are some of the, because that's really going to be critical to their life success and life experiences, being able to stay connected in those relationships and developing the mental, physical, emotional toolbox to deal with this trauma that will come up, whether you're in a combat zone or not. What a lot of the experiences in the military, in a combat zone or not, are going to cause some traumatic events. So what advice would you give to someone in that situation, or maybe a young couple like what my daughter's looking at right now, that would help?
Yeah, so it's going back to that same strong network that you have before you go. You have to have that when you come back, and that spouse who gets left behind, it needs to be very clear that spouse that gets left behind is part of this journey too. And just because you're the guy that goes downrange, as we call it, into a combat zone, you can't just say that you're the hero here, right? Or you're the guy, the boots on the ground doing the job, whatever your job happens to be, whether it's a PJ or an infantry officer or whatever it is that we're talking about. Or if it's somebody that's being a support element, a cook, or somebody that is needed to help, keep the mission moving forward. It doesn't matter what the job is. Yes, certain jobs have more risk and are exposed to more danger and things like that. But no matter what the job is, you still are going to experience things like just even typical homesickness, right? Like, I've been gone for how long? Like, this stinks. I would just love to just go get some pizza tonight, and the simple things that we talk about while we're overseas, but that it's really important for that service member to understand that spouse that gets left behind, or those family members that are left behind that's supporting you, don't close the door on them when you get back. Don't make them feel bad about them wanting to know about what you went through. And again, it doesn't happen overnight. I think that's probably one huge piece of advice is don't expect the doors to open up from the service member and just start pouring their hearts out. Are there going to be people like that? Yes. But I would say, generally speaking, knowing what I've known after a couple deployments, that doesn't happen overnight. There's a lot of processing that we have to go through when we come back. And that piece takes a long time. And the more that you are exposed to, the more danger, the more elements of fear and fight or flight, things that you faced, it just takes longer to unpack that. And so just know that that's not going to be an overnight process. It's going to be years, most likely. And you just got to let them know that you're there for them. And when they're ready to open up and talk about it, I feel like most people will, just because they've got a good support network.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that. And Mike, how did your experience as an officer in the Army inform or help you structure your business operations? What are there elements from that training and that experience that do your employees come in? Do they have to stand up muster before you or anything? Do they salute when you come in the door? What are some of the elements that you brought in, and what are some that you've intentionally left out in your entrepreneurial journey?
Yeah, so there's definitely the military style of leadership is typically more of a direct style of leadership. You do this, and this is like this we call this the knife hand. It's like pointing when you give orders or whatever. It's a military thing, but it's very direct. And in the military, it's interesting. People ask me about my leadership style and how the two work together, and they do cross somewhat. But you can't, in a civilian world, in a company that you own or whatever, you can't just bark orders to people. It just doesn't work. It may work initially, and inciting fear into people to get them to do something is not a good leadership style. I get.
Did you learn that by experience, Mike, because you tried it, or did you learn that in the military so you didn't apply it when you got home?
Probably a little bit of both. I was probably, in my early days, I was probably a little more Army-like. My wife says, are we dealing with Army Mike today, or are we, dealing with, peak one Mike or whatever? But I learned over time, certainly the effects of how you talk to people and how you treat people and how you value people. But in the military, I didn't learn that route, right? It was like, I don't care. You're going to go take the hill. It doesn't matter who or what you are and what you represent, but you're going to take the hill, or you're going to take the trash out, or whatever it is. Otherwise, we're gonna smoke you doing push-ups until you can't, do another push-up, and then we're gonna make you go do some other exercise until you learn by pain. Pain is a memory that makes you remember these things to not do them the next time. But that in the civilian world, you can't treat people like that. And I will tell you, like at one point in my military career, I got tasked to teach officer candidate school, and that was a pivotal moment for me, because that's like a 16-week course, I think is what it was, something like that. And in the beginning, you have to weed people out, so you've got to have that real strong, direct, input on these people to get, because a lot of them they'll just quit right away on just the simplest stuff by getting physically smoked. But the strong ones will know that this is a game, and they're gonna eventually get transitioned into a learning piece where now they're gonna really learn to be taught as an officer. And that was pivotal to me, because it taught me as a leader how to respect people more, how to understand their qualities, and value what they bring to the table, and exposing those in a good way, which, it's just was my particular style. That direct style it just doesn't work.
I love that you said that we learn from our pain. And so
Yeah.
I would love to know, what are some life lessons that you've learned from your pain, Mike?
I've lived a lot of my my business life, running a company, by the school of hard knocks. I learned the hard way, which, there's value to that too, because those pain points make you remember that the next time. So there's definitely something there. But I will tell you that there's a lot easier ways of doing things. And by that, I mean, getting help and assistance. And my wife always said for years, why don't you go find a mentor? And I'm like, who's going to mentor me? Like is some other builder going to mentor me? We're competition. Like, why would anybody do that? And it really wasn't until I joined the mastermind that we're both in that I got my first business coach. And at that time, I'd been in business for, I don't know, 17 years or something like that. And people would ask me, they're like, you've been in business this long and you just went and got a coach? Like, what are you doing? Or what are you doing wrong? And there was a lot of reasons why I did it, but being able to understand that there's coaches out there that will help you, and being vulnerable through that process has hockey sticked what we've done in my own construction company.
And that hockey stick, I imagine, has been an important factor in being able to then give back through this charity that you've created. Would that have been an opportunity you think you could have taken on without getting a mentor and then growing the business and your own capacity to the point where it is now?
Not even close. There's no way. I mean, when you try to, people would ask me, hey, did you ever try to scale your business? And I was like, what the heck does that even mean? But when I left to go to Afghanistan, there was a scaling piece there, right? Because I can't be there anymore. I can't be the one doing things. But as when I come back and as I'm trying to grow the business very slowly, you're scaling upward. You're hiring people to essentially replace you, not necessarily to grow the business, which again was a huge mindset shift. I didn't understand that. I didn't understand for so many years that by starting my own business, all I did was buy myself a job, until I started taking the hats off through coaching. And then I ended up getting another coach who's, both of these guys are in our mastermind, but one's helping me with the nonprofit side as well, just because I know that can get me that hockey stick effect that much faster. Like I just know that having people, surrounding yourself with people that want to grow whatever it is, whether it's a nonprofit or a regular business, is the key to success for all of that.
I love that you've highlighted mentorship and the value that that's adding. I feel like that's a little thing that I wish that I had learned like 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And I can only imagine what kind of a difference that might have made. Maybe you and I learn at the same pace. We have to get knocked around long enough until we open our eyes and see maybe a little bit easier way of doing things.
Yeah, for sure.
So Mike, you've got a lot of amazing things going on. The business is going well. What are you looking forward to with excitement in the future? So that's one question. And then for someone who's interested in either supporting what you're doing or supporting veterans in general, what advice would you give to them?
Yeah, so as far as my future goes, I'm just trying to scale my construction company to the point where I can get it to run passively, or horizontally, however you want to look at it. That'll never probably be 100%, but if I can get it to 80% or 90%, it frees up a lot of time for me to be able to focus on my second mountain, which is this nonprofit. And so, to have that time freedom that, we all talk about it, right? Like, what is the definition of wealth? Is it having a bucket of cash? I think most of us, we get to this point where it's like, really, it's the time freedom to be able to do what you want, when you want, with who you want, but be able to have that money, to do those things. And that's where I'm at in my life now, where I'm trying to make that transition over the next 2 or 3 years, where I can run that nonprofit and pour 100% of my heart and soul into that thing. So that's kind of the journey and the trajectory I'm on right now. I mean, I know it's going to take a few years. And again, I'm not trying to save the world. I'm just trying to little bit of a ripple in the water and hope that it can get some legs.
I think it's amazing what you're doing, and it inspires me to reach higher and aim for the goals that I have. One of the purposes of this podcast is to give people tools, ideas. My dad, growing up, my dad always used to say, Alan, remember the little things. In fact, he said it often enough that that's actually what's on his headstone now is remember the little things. If you could provide just a few little things that have been instrumental in your prosperity, in your happiness, in finding purpose and meaning in your life, what would those little things be for Mike Christensen?
Ooh, that's a deep one. Well, I think sometimes we get so focused on, as entrepreneurs, we get so focused on growing a business that you kind of get tunnel vision, right? You're just like, I'm going to do whatever it takes to get this business running, scaled, whatever that looks like. Get to a certain point and you're selling it. So much of what we hear in our circles that we run in is all about these investments that, we're gonna get this thing to a certain point and sell it in 3 to 5 years, or we're gonna take it to an IPO and we're gonna sell it. And then all we do is just move the goalpost, right? We're like, we did that. Now we're just going to move the goalpost down the road. And I think we're all probably guilty of it to some extent because we've got to have something to chase. It's something that provides us with purpose and fulfillment in life. But with all that being said, you've got to be, I feel like you've got to be a steward to your own goodwill, your own self-love, self-care, I think is super important because if you don't have that, you're not going to be good for anybody else. It's the oxygen mask coming down from the plane. Like, get it on yourself first, help those around you. So I feel like that's really important to have self-awareness and to understand who you are as a person and how you're going to help others. And that ties over into your marriage and your family and things like that. I feel like that's really important, but then also to just be a generally overall well-rounded person, spiritually, mentally, physically, active in some sort of community, whether it's a church or a mastermind group or whatever it is that provides a sense of community. I feel like all that adds to happiness and longevity for people down the road.
I love that. I love the thank you for bringing aviation into the Plain Success podcast at the end with the applying your own oxygen mask first. I appreciate that. And I love the example that you set in all those areas. Mike, if someone's interested in building a home, having work done, how do they get in touch with you if they're concerned about a friend or a family member who's a veteran or active duty and they think that you could help? How do they get in touch with you for those two different resources?
Yeah, if it's just general information about one of the organizations or the other, you can call our office, and that number is 480-481-5150. But if there's a veteran in need, please don't hesitate to reach out to me personally. I will be glad to help in any way possible. My personal cell number is 602-206-6957, and glad to help in any way, no matter what time of the day or night and what day it is, doesn't matter. I'll be glad to help.
I know that's close to your heart, Mike, so I appreciate you being willing to put yourself out there that way. That's a big deal.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. Mike,
thank you for your friendship, for your vulnerability, for sharing the amazing things that you're doing. Plain Success is living a life just like what Mike Christensen is doing, where maybe it hasn't been perfect, but I love that what you've learned has brought you to a place where you're helping others experience joy, happiness, healing, health, and prosperity. Thanks, Mike, for who you are and everything that you're doing.
Oh, you're welcome. I really appreciate you having me on. It is healing to talk about your journey and your story too, because you just don't know how it's going to resonate with somebody else.
Absolutely. One of my purposes in starting the Plain Success podcast was to highlight the amazing work of the nonprofit that I volunteer for, Angel Flight West. Angel Flight West provides free air transportation for people in need of care far from home. And especially relevant to today's episode, we provide free flights for active duty military personnel and for military veterans. If your family needs help with transportation, please reach out to Angel Flight West. You can find us at angelflightwest.org and talk to one of our coordinators. Our pilots would love to be of service to you, who have been of such great service to us. angelflightwest.org.